now it's time to introduce our man of the hour. And for those of you that put up your hand to the question of being at one of our events before, you know that we generally like to highlight very non-traditional CPAs. I think this one may take the cake. So let me introduce John. So John grew up in Peterborough. He went to Western and went to the Ivy School of Business, also my alma mater. He was interested in software from a very early age, but ultimately decided to pursue his CPA. After graduation, he joined RSM Richter, which was RSM Richter at the time, and now it's like two different firms, but if anybody's old enough to remember when they were one, John was there.
You sound old.
Yeah, we're getting old. He started in audit, like many of us, and then quickly moved into insolvency. But in 2010, he made a pretty major career change, and he started an online gaming business called Mobywan. And contrary to the usual story, John did not take on a business or a finance role. He decided to be an iOS developer. And after 2 years working on that company, he continued that path. He worked at another startup called Healthcare Made Simple. Apparently he really likes the word simple in the names of the companies that he works at, where he was also the lead iOS developer there. After that, he moved to a dev shop, or like an agency that works on external clients' development services. It's called The Working Group, and he was there for a couple of years before joining the Wealthsimple team in 2016. John now leads 7 different engineering teams at Wealthsimple, including the consumer-facing app that a lot of us are familiar with. I guess another really important thing here is that he also won a junior provincial title in curling. So if you were ever wondering about his credentials as a Canadian, that is in the bag. And finally, he's one of the people that helps us very, very deeply with the Fin and Tech program by bringing his very unique perspective to teaching CPAs about engineering. So John has a very cool, unique path, and we're really excited to get talking. So let's get talking. Okay.
It's quite the intro.
Oh, well.
Sounds crazy.
You haven't met him yet. Let's see. So I think a lot of us have been dissatisfied with either aspects of our jobs or our jobs as a whole, various points in our career. But for a lot of us out there, that means like moving into industry. You decided to really take that up a notch and become an iOS developer. I wanted to ask, how did you know that the change that you needed in your career wasn't as simple as moving to industry? It was something a lot bigger.
That's a loaded question. There's a lot behind that. I think, this is on, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I think for me, there was a turning point in 2010 where I was like, let me back up a little bit. I got really excited when the iPhone was launched. So the iPhone kind of sparked my interest in software development again. It came to Canada late 2009. The software development kit was launched. I started playing around with it on my own time. And it got to the point where I was just loving doing that so much that I would go home and I would watch videos and I would read books before bed and read blog posts and absorb as much possible content as I could. I never did that with the Tax Act or the handbook or anything. I don't know if you guys have, but that wasn't my game at all. So for me, it got to the point where I was working all day, but all I wanted to do was go home and do this other stuff. And I think that was kind of once I got to understanding that, and I kind of came to terms with it, that's probably when that decision happened. It wasn't an easy decision by far. I think I worked for a year on my own side stuff before actually committing. That was the first time I left a real professional job. So if you've ever done that, it can be really emotional. I feel like you're letting people down sometimes, but ultimately businesses go on, companies go on, and it worked for me. Yeah.
Great. I kind of wonder, because you were in insolvency, and that's not necessarily the easiest side of the accounting profession to work in. Do you think that some of that yearning for something else came down to what you were doing currently, or was it something that, had you ended up in any different part of accounting, that you would have ended up in the same spot?
I don't like audit at all. With a background in computers, a little bit, dabbled a lot in computers when I was younger. Having to sample transactions and add things up manually just did not resonate with me at all. The computer was smarter than me. It's already adding it up. Why do I have to add it? So that was obviously out. I explored industry for a little bit. I applied to Apple, got late in their interview process, didn't get the job eventually, which is probably a good thing. I think ultimately, I was working in insolvency for a long time, and I don't know if anybody here works in insolvency or has experience in that stuff, but there's nobody happy in that environment. There's not a single happy person. It's all miserable, frowny people and people yelling at you all the time. I have a funny story. When I was working in insolvency, you're 22 at a school or whatever, I don't know, that age, and you go into these companies and you're trying to lock down assets. And you're going and you're telling people who have been working at this company 30 years or longer than you've been alive that this is now my business and I get to make decisions, right? And they look at you like you're crazy. So the one day we had to, cash was tight, so we had to lay off a bunch of the workforce. That workforce had been there a long time. It's a sad story and everything, right? But being the guy in the suit walking into the manufacturing plant, when I came out on the Friday, I was like, yeah, it's Friday, work's over, I get to go to the cottage. Come out and there's screws drilled into the top of my tire on that day that we had let go a bunch of people. It wasn't me who made the decision, I'm just the guy. So that was also helpful in making my decision.
I was gonna say, I feel like that could have an impact. Did you, after you made that call and you gave your notice, was there any trepidation? Was there any doubt? Or as soon as you did it, it was like, wow, this is where I'm meant to be?
Oh, no doubt at all. By that point, I don't know. I've come to realize over the past several years that I'm a person who doesn't do well with things in moderation. So I only do things, it takes me a long time to make a decision, but once I commit, it's full on. And I can see that pattern with a bunch of things I do in my life. So this is just another example, right? Where it took me a long time to finally make that decision, but once that happened, once the call was out of the way, that was the hardest part, right? Telling somebody you're leaving. But ultimately it was easy because I'm not going anywhere else. If I was gonna stay in accounting, I'd still be here. I'm just completely leaving because you guys scared me away from the industry.
Well, so what was it about the iPhone launch that was so game changing? I mean, there were smartphones before that, BlackBerry and all of that. Well, fair. But what was it about the iPhone that was so significantly different that changed your whole perspective around it?
That's a good question. I had a Palm when I was in high school, so a little bit of a nerd.
I think half the people here don't seem to know what a Palm was.
But for me, I don't know, I can still remember the moment, it was it's going to be 10 years ago now, when I ran my first app on a real device. Running on your computer is one thing, and building websites, clicking things it's interesting, you get stuff to show up, but having something in your hand that you're tangibly touching and playing with and moving around, that was a completely surreal experience for me at that time. And Apple had done such an amazing job with the touch UI that no other touch UI had ever done before. And
yeah.
So yeah.
Great. So let's jump into Mobywan. Tell us about the company, why, and give us a little bit of how you got there from working in insolvency to starting a digital gaming company on an iPhone
Sure.
app.
Well, I would sit at my desk in my office between jobs looking at TechCrunch. You read TechCrunch and reading about all these people, working out of their basement making $1 million off these little iPhone games when they used to sell for $10. That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it's inspiring. It's also a feeling of jealousy, or I guess these kids these days call it FOMO, right?
Yeah.
FOMO. I was reading all that kind of stuff, got excited about it. We actually quit without an idea. It's I convinced a couple other friends, we quit. We're all right, we're gonna do something. What are we gonna do? And it took us months to figure out what we wanted to do. We had no idea. It was probably, whatever. I think of it as I went back to school for a couple of years, more so than I launched a business. But we settled on that. It was right around the time when Apple was offering background location updates on your phone. So the game was location-based, similar if you've ever played Pokemon Go, actually, where the real world matters in the gameplay. Very similar mechanic. It was just like way early, and yeah, phones weren't as good as they are today. But
So, it's funny because I think a lot of people tend to relate an unsuccessful startup experience as some sort of a blemish on your record. But like something that we do at Luminary is we actually include that as a desired characteristic on our job postings. And the reason for that is we understand how hard it is to actually start a business. And if anybody's gotten to any kind of meaningful milestone, it says that there's something there. So when you look back on this now after having gone through a couple of different startups, what do you think you took from that experience that allowed you to do what you're doing today?
I mean, we learned how to do everything wrong, essentially. You go to any startup classes today and they talk about, talk to your customers, build small prototypes, get out away from the computer, all that kind of stuff, right? Well, when you have 3 developers who aren't that excited about talking to people, you think you're smart and you build something that's cool and you play with the 3 or 4 of you and you're like, this is awesome, and then you release it and everybody ignores you. And so that's eye-opening, so what I take away from that, first off, I took away a lot of learning how to program because I had to learn it all myself. Development, teaching, how to drive yourself, how to work hard, all that kind of stuff, those standard things. But in terms of running a business, you have to get away from your computer. Absolutely, because you can't build in isolation and you have to build smart.
Yeah. So is it, if I ask you why it didn't work, is it basically that you just weren't talking to the customers and you just put something out there that you thought was good?
And I think we were having a lot of fun. I think we were just enjoying not having a boss and just sitting, working at home or wherever, just for fun. And I think ultimately we didn't have a plan. There was no business plan. There was no idea of where we're going to launch. There was no release strategy. How are you going to make this grow from nothing to something? It was just we're just going to put it up. It's going to work, right? No, it didn't work. Yeah. So.
And well, now you're at Wealthsimple. So, then from there you moved on to a company called Healthcare Made Simple. This was started by a friend of yours, and it was a very different experience. You were in the medical industry, and that, from what you told me, you actually seemed to learn a whole lot more about business there, which is funny. Hearing you say, you didn't make a business plan, you went to business school, you got your CA, and somehow you ended up not making a business plan when you started a business. Just talk us through that, and then what changed at Healthcare Made Simple that you're like, oh, okay, maybe we should do it this way.
I think I fell into the same trap all developers do. If you've ever worked with software engineers or people in development at all, they get really, really excited about building cool things, and they don't think about the business side of stuff. And so, part of my job today is bridging that gap, right? Bridging that gap between our leadership team and our engineers, talking to both sides, prioritization, all that kind of stuff. And in understanding the business side of stuff is really important to making sure you're working on the right things, where the trade-offs are. Software is all about trade-offs, even from the code level all the way through prioritization. So, in the beginning, I just fell into the same trap. This is really cool, I'm building stuff that looks fun, and I'm enjoying it. Maybe not being long-sighted enough, but.
Well, we're very lucky at Luminary. Our engineers don't do that at all, right, guys? When you look at that kind of a career move, I think there's a lot of us out here that just, aren't necessarily planning to become full-fledged coders or quit our jobs. But it's definitely an area that we all need to know a lot more about. So where did you start, or where would you recommend anybody starting if somebody's like, I don't want to actually go full Monty like John, but I want to be able to feel comfortable talking about it and understanding conceptually about this area?
Sure, they should probably sign up for Luminary, right?
Nice. That was not planned, I promise.
I think there's a lot of, obviously there's a lot of great resources online. Technology is becoming more pervasive across all industries. So there's lots of people to talk to, lots of people to learn from. Events like this obviously help. I think there's a lot of courses. I remember when I first started learning development, I relied pretty heavily on the iTunes U program. Like Stanford had a bunch of courses online. I think it was like probably when that thing first launched that helped teach me on how to get there. So I haven't looked recently, but there's a lot of online learning platforms. I like Coursera and Udacity and Khan Academy and all that stuff that you can like learn from to really, you know, it doesn't have to be technical development. It could be project management. It could be all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So before we get into the second half of your career and probably some of the stuff that a lot of people really want to hear about, we have, you looking at my...
Yeah, I'm trying to.
We've got a lightning round.
Oh.
And so this is something we do where we try to give people a little bit more of an understanding of you as a person. You're supposed to answer as quickly as you can in hopefully one phrase or one word answers. Are you ready?
No.
Okay. At least it's honest.
Yeah.
Okay, so number one, what is the most accounting thing about you? Something that you can't seem to shake off even after you've left the industry?
I force my wife to do budgets line by line every day. Maybe not every day, but pretty close.
Jeez, okay.
Yeah, Excel's great still. I still like it.
So the second one, and for anybody that doesn't know, we maybe 8 months ago had the CFO of Wealthsimple at one of our events. Her name is Lean, and we asked her this question, so we have to ask you. What sport or game would you absolutely destroy your CEO Mike Katchen at?
Oh man, probably curling. It's got to be. It's an
He's
easy
not-
one.
Yeah, I don't think he has a lot of curling experience.
No,
Okay.
he's pretty competitive though.
Yeah, he was actually really good at sports growing up. It was painful. What's worse to live through, accountant stereotypes or coder stereotypes?
You know, they're not too much different.
That's the answer? All right. We'll give that one to you. What's the app that you think is most brilliantly developed, other than the Wealthsimple app?
Oh, that's the easy one.
Yeah, of course.
Man, that is tough. Whew.
Don't want to make it easy on you.
No, that is hard. Off the top of my head, what do I use regularly other than work things? I use an app called Spark for my email. It's pretty neat. It integrates with a bunch of stuff. OmniFocus is a to-do app that I manage. So Spark integrates really well with that. It's just a nice, clean UI. I like a big fan of like clean, seamless, fluid user interfaces and experiences. Simple. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so finally, why curling?
I think you only get into curling if your parents were in curling. I think that's how it works. Or you get to it later through some friends. So my dad was a curler. He won a provincial championship in 1983, about 9 months before I was born.
Okay. And so your dad was also an accountant, from what I understand, right?
My dad is, yes, he was. He's retired now, but he owned his own practice in
Okay.
Peterborough. Yeah.
All right, so John's got a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, so we're expecting some very interesting curling accountants in like 20 years. Okay, so let's move on. You were at Healthcare Made Simple for a couple of years, and that company ended up kind of winding down. And you took a very unorthodox approach to getting your next job. So I thought maybe you'd like to share with everybody how that happened. And it's I just want to say, as somebody who is now greatly involved in helping people get jobs, this is actually a much better strategy than you would think.
So I worked at Healthcare Made Simple. It was a small company. Me and a partner, we had a few staff. And we worked on the 8th floor in this building just over there on Brant and Adelaide. Older building, and then we were there for about 2 years, and we ended up, I ended up having a kid, and he was to daycare at that time, and if you've ever had children and know daycare costs in Toronto, they're not cheap, so I needed a real income, and so because we were in this building, we knew that there was another company on the third floor called the Working Group, and they often hosted, they're pretty active in the community. They host a lot of events in their space, so a lot of startup events, inclusivity events. If you haven't been to any there, they're pretty cool. Go check them out. A lot of interesting tech meetups and stuff there. So we had been down there a few times before. And so when it got to this point where I was like, I need a real job, the first thing I did was not update my resume. My resume still says like accounting, Richter, from like 2008. I think when I applied to Apple, I haven't changed it since. I actually just went down. We rode the elevator down to the third floor and I knocked and basically said, can I have a job? And because like engineering developers are so in demand right now in the Toronto space, not just Toronto, but everywhere. And there's talk right now about these big companies coming to Toronto. Amazon just pulled out, but you talk about Google and Uber and Instacart and all these big companies that are coming. The demand's just going to get higher and higher. And like we're hiring like incredible, like a lot of people, and it's really, really difficult to find a lot of talent. So, I got lucky in the sense that this demand was there. I come down, knock on the door, they said, sure, can you come back like tomorrow and show us some like code you've written? I'm like, sure, I can do that, that's no problem. Come back the next day, sit down with somebody in the boardroom, walk through some of the stuff I'd been working on like 5 floors above them, and then heard back like a day later, like, yeah, you want this job, you can have it.
That's how it works a lot. So I think what you're saying is if there's any CPAs out here that decide they want to be a developer, all they got to do is knock on your door. And
I'll listen to anybody.
You heard it
See
here.
what happens.
So you also actually met the CEO and founder of Wealthsimple, Mike Catchin, when you were working there. I figured you might want to share that story because it's a pretty good one.
Yeah, it was 2017 maybe. No, I already started Wealthsimple. I don't know. Somewhere before, like a year or two before I joined Wealthsimple. Wealthsimple is really in its early stages. I don't know if anybody here are customers of Wealthsimple or not, or if you've tried it or not, or if you've been longtime customers. It's all like yellow branded now. In the beginning it was blue. I don't know if you have any blue users back then. At the very, very beginning. And Mike came in. Their initial launch strategy was to do a lot of lunch and learns at tech companies around the city. So they would schedule lunch and learns, they'd come in and Mike would do a pitch. He'd do 5 principles of investing, right? What are the 5? I don't remember them. I haven't been to one. I haven't had to lead one. But essentially like, stay calm, invest for the long term, take out the emotion, all that kind of stuff, right? All the good practices. And I watched this lunch and learn. And of course, with the CPA background and understanding a little bit more about finance and maybe the rest of the company, I looked at him and I thought, this guy is crazy. Trying to start a bank in Canada, trying to disrupt these big 5. And I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. So I signed up and sent him $10,000 anyways to see what he would do with it. It was underwater for over a year. That time in the market wasn't very good. We're experiencing another one of those now. But that's how it started. Met him, thought he was crazy. I tell him that today. I'm like, I thought you were crazy back then. And he just laughs. And he's like, I know, it's good to be crazy.
Yeah.
Which I guess is a good trait for a founder.
Yeah, if you don't have a little bit.
Do you consider yourself crazy?
I don't know. Burka? Yeah. There you go. But that didn't actually lead to you joining Wealthsimple. You were still at the working group for another year afterwards.
Yeah, it was another year. And I got to the point where if you've ever worked at agency work or client services, same thing, where you're basically working on behalf of other people. And it got to the point where I wanted to have more ownership over what I was doing and building my own thing. And seeing things past a V1. One of the reasons I got into this space in the beginning was because you have so much power to change people's lives on a grand scale. I'd never experienced that in accounting. I'd never experienced this idea of, I can work on something for a few months directly, and then my work becomes available to hundreds of thousands of people through the magic of the App Store or the internet. And I can see true, real impact on that stuff. So that got me excited, but you didn't get that in agency. You got a lot of release it, move on to the next project, release it, and you never saw the continuous cycle of feedback and improvement. So around that time, I was like, I want more of that. And at that point, there was a site called hire.com. It's still working. It's like an online recruiter. It's the same as like a recruiter, but it's online. Basically Tinder for recruiting, pretty much. Not that I know what Tinder is. That was after my time too.
You're complaining that I'm calling you old?
Yeah. So the recruiter reached out to me. We had a chat. Again, I thought these Wealthsimple people are crazy. But I was excited about the opportunity, excited about the job, excited about the potential. I'd seen the growth in Wealthsimple in the past like year and a bit. And the growth just keeps going. And it's super exciting today.
So just to get a sense, can I get hands up for anybody that's actually a Wealthsimple client right now? Nice. Okay, we got some good turnout here. I was one of the blue guys. What is it like having that kind of a situation that we can just get like 150 random people, ask them who uses Wealthsimple, and you have, I don't know, something like 15-20% of them raising their hand? The thing that you like, I mean, just for everybody here, John built the user-facing app. So if you use that app, that's what John built. Like, how does that feel knowing that?
Well, it's more people than use my game, that's for sure. You know, it's awesome. It's the first job I've ever worked in where I see like advertisements all over the place, and I see things on TV. I'll be watching the Jays game, and all of a sudden like our commercials come up, and every time I see that, I get a little bit excited. You'll be at a bar, it'll come up on the TV, or like, it's just, for me, that's something I've never experienced before, working at Richter. Like, Richter's not putting like ads in the middle of the Blue Jays games. And like the clients you're working for, it's not the same feeling. So for me,
on the subway and you work at MNP, you'll see like the debt relief posters. Somebody knows what I'm talking about out there.
But also to be proud of the ads that you're putting out. Have you seen, I'm sure most people have seen Wealthsimple ads around somewhere. They're pretty moving and pretty powerful, and I have huge respect for our brand team. They're very, like, the creativeness behind them is pretty amazing. And I think like knowing that you've built it and you've owned it, and like you're part of it, is just such a motivating story. Like, it doesn't even matter. Like, it's a startup, so there's all these problems with startups, right? Like, you hear about them all the time. Like, we have them too. But it's just like, it's so, all that doesn't matter because of like how much fun it is to just be part of something and be part, and it's like, see it grow, see it everywhere, see people use it, have people like, I was wearing this shirt to my son's t-ball game last year, and a guy just randomly came up to me. He's like, "Oh, you work at Wealthsimple," and like we just kicked off the conversation, and like we were friends with the rest of the league. Like, it's just, it's such a very different experience. Like, wear a Richter shirt around, and nobody says anything.
You still have your Richter shirt?
Oh yeah.
You got a Richter shirt? I didn't get any Y shirt. Can you talk us through a little bit, I think for anybody that's used the app for any significant period of time, it's changed quite a bit over the past 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it would be an interesting kind of spotlight into what the development cycle and the development world is like, for you to kind of talk through a little bit of like, what's one cycle when you do an update to the Wealthsimple app? How does that look?
Yeah, I mean, we think in short term and long term, right? So our short term release cycle is like, especially for the mobile app, is 1 week. So every Friday we're submitting a new build to Apple, and we release it Monday if everything goes well. And so we're constantly iterating. It's like a constant idea of iteration and like deployment, feedback, iterate, deploy, feedback, all that stuff. And that stays true to one of our values. Like, one of our values of our company is basically raise the bar, or always in beta. We're like, we're never done, right? Everything's like, we ship before we're done, because then we get the feedback, right? And then we can make it better. If you wait till you're done, you never ship something. And if like, so today, if you've been following Wealthsimple at all, we have a new app called Wealthsimple Trade, which is a zero commission stock trading app. It was announced in August. We have a giant wait list of people waiting to use it, and we just started rolling out the top of the wait list invites today. So today's been a big day.
Congrats.
Yeah, but it's so far from done, right? Like, it's just something that we're at the point now where we need to get it out, we need to get feedback, we need to see people use it in order to make decisions. What it's going to look like 3 months from now is completely different than what it looks like today. One of the famous stories, or like the stories that Mike likes to say about Wealthsimple, the website, is it started as a spreadsheet. Like the first version of Wealthsimple was a spreadsheet. See, smart people, they build small things, just like build anyways. Started as a spreadsheet, morphed into a website, and we're on like version 5 of the website at this point. But the story they like to say is they launched a version of the website in 2016, and it won the Webby Award for Best Financial Website in the world. And that's one of the most prestigious online awards you can win. And at which point the next week they decided to tear it down and start all over and build the 2017 version, which also won the Webby again. So there's this mentality at Wealthsimple about just like the constant improvement, constantly make it better. And so the iteration cycles, back to your original question, can be very long, like long-term yearly planning, quarterly planning, but also like on a weekly cadence even. Like we deploy means we ship code to production, and we deploy from our engineering department across we have 70 engineers or so now. We deploy over 100 times a day new code to our platform. So.
Yeah, that was for me one of the things that's really shocking, because you use this all the time. We don't notice any of those changes, but that's happening 100 times a day is pretty nuts. Have you had a situation where there was a major bug, a major failure? Can you talk about that?
It happens all the time. But we've got systems in place to recover. We've got backups, of course, all that stuff. But we had an outage last weekend for an hour or so, where we deployed something that didn't break immediately. See, it broke overnight, of course, when people are sleeping. And then we get paged and woken up, and I get asked to fix it. These things happen, right? Especially when you're trying to move as fast as we are. But as long as we have the right monitoring, alerting, and stuff in place to recover, we can get back up and running pretty quickly.
Neat. So when you joined Wealthsimple, there were 40 people. They had $500 million of assets under management. And now, just like 2 years later, it's over 200 people, and there's over $3 billion in assets under management.
All me.
All John. What do you think, like looking at it from an internal point of view, what do you think the secret sauce at Wealthsimple is? Because there's lots of companies that just can't manage that kind of growth.
Right. Well, I can tell you it comes from like the ambitions of our leaders, I think, is one of the big things that sticks out to me. There's a bunch of things, obviously. Like we have a lot of great people who work really hard and stuff. But I remember we hit $2 billion back in the spring. And our next milestone was $3 billion. It's like, how do we get to $3 billion? So we're going to set up a business plan, right? On how to get to $3 billion.
You learned eventually.
Yeah. And so what does that mean on a month-by-month basis in terms of targets and forecasts, and what do we need to do to hit that point, right? So we built this model around I didn't build it, but smart people built it. And how do we get there by the end of the year? We wanted to hit it by the end of December.
Yeah.
Okay. Put it all together, and our COO came into the room, and he's like, great, this is great. Now how do we hit $3.6 billion by the end of September? Right? So, and the purpose, it all made sense because of the market. Didn't foresee a market downturn, but prepared for a downturn to still hit those numbers. And it's that drive of we can always be better. We can always do more. Push ourselves even as far as possible, even when we don't think there's anywhere else to go, and believe in the people you work with in order to get there. And as long as you motivate and rally the people around you, and you're excited to work with the people next to you who are also driving and pushing as hard, and everybody takes pride in what we do, and it's not a competitive environment, it's a very collaborative environment. We're helping each other. We don't work crazy hours. There's no engineers there 15 hours a day. We try to keep normal hours, but it's about working smart. So my boss, the CTO Carney, he's from Amazon. He worked several years at Amazon, so he comes from the Jeff Bezos school of thought, where they describe just 3 ways you can work. You can work hard, you can work smart, or you can work long, right? At Amazon, they want you to do all 3. But really, you can only do 2 out of 3 on a long-term basis. So we try to prioritize working smart and working hard, right? And that means working on the right things, automating where possible, cutting out the the BS. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah.
All right. And like focusing and like.
It's a PG-13 plus.
All right. Focusing on what's like really important to do, and that goes back to the beginning of where we talked about like having a good understanding of what the business priorities are helps make the right engineering prioritization decisions as part of the development cycle.
Well, it all seems to feed in from your original experience of not kind of putting those business priorities up there and doing it. But you know what? That's why we go through these kind of learning experiences. So what's pretty interesting about your job now is that you're a coder, but you don't code anymore. You've been promoted past actually coding. So how do you make sure that you are adding value? Like how do you run that team, not actually playing a part in the real execution of it?
It's a good question. Anybody here has managed people before, managed multiple people before? Sometimes you feel useless. Sometimes you feel like a therapist. Sometimes it's whatever the day throws at you, right? Ultimately, you know, my job is about making sure people are working on the right stuff, right? Making sure they have the space and room to do that work, but also unblocking them if needed, right? So, you know, I'll watch, you know, work with all the teams, sit with all the people, follow along what they're doing. If I see teams certainly falling behind or struggling with a certain thing, you know, you go in and you help, you fix process or whatever. Ultimately, the transition into this role from like a IC role or individual contributor role was very hard for me because when you write code, it goes back to that tangibility thing. Like when you write code, you know exactly what you've done all day. It's like, I've done these 4 tickets, right? And here's the feature I built. I can show you at the end of the day. Like I did something, right? As you go into management, you don't have that same output, and so you have to start thinking of like your team's output, right? How are my teams doing? But you don't get that feedback right away. You don't get it like on a daily basis. You start thinking like maybe I get it on the monthly basis, the weekly basis. Did I hit the release cycle? Did we get into the app what we wanted to get into the app this week, right? At the level I'm at now, I'm thinking quarters, right? It's like, are we on track for the whole quarter? Did I achieve what I needed to on the whole quarter? Adding value that way. I'm doing a lot of hiring right now as we grow, so like those are like concrete metrics at least, but it's very, very different than day-to-day coding for sure.
Well, I think one of the most interesting things about coding and software development is that people who do it actually enjoy doing it. So you can kind of compare that. I don't know, has anybody here ever met a CFO that talks about how much they miss doing journal entries? I personally haven't heard that one, but you hear that a lot from developers that as they kind of get past the point where they're now managing, they actually miss writing code. I thought just as somebody who's been in both sides, you might have a pretty interesting perspective on that difference between the two professions.
I really miss writing code, really miss it. It's such a surreal experience. If you've ever written code, or even if you've ever been like so focused on something, then you're like, there's a problem ahead of you, and you're like, I need to figure this out. There's like this itch to like, I can't leave until I figure out what's wrong here. You can sit down at your computer at like 8 o'clock in the morning, or some other developers are like 10:30 usually. I don't know about these guys back there, but
nah, they're good. They're good.
Like 8 o'clock in the morning.
Look, Robert's coding right now. So.
Yeah. That's what I'm getting to, like at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then you all of a sudden you look up and it's like 6 p.m. and you didn't eat lunch, and like people are gone around you. Like, where'd everybody go? Right?
Like in the zone.
You're in that zone, right? And you know, then you like if I don't finish what I was working on, I had to go home for the day. I'm like all grumpy all night. It's like I can't sleep. It's like I didn't finish. Like kids don't talk to me, right? I need to get back to the office to fix this thing, right? And so there's this much different like attachment to the work that I never had before, just because it's like it's almost like addicting a little bit. But yeah, I do miss it.
Hands up for who's been in the zone while doing journal entries. Come on, somebody. No takers. Okay. No, that is, I mean, it definitely is very, very different in that sense. And, you know, as much as you quipped about engineers and accountants having a lot of the same stereotypes about each other, what you often hear about in a lot of different tech companies, and what I think maybe some of us here have experienced, is that a lot of times the engineering side of a company and the business side of a company have a lot of trouble communicating with one another. And I thought that maybe you could comment on that, and maybe how again, you have this unique perspective as somebody that's been on both sides of that. How can you recommend to everybody here how to work very positively with software teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think communication is the big thing, right? Communication is so important. And it is, like, you can't treat those two groups of people like the same. They understand different words, different language. It's basically a different language you have to speak between the two groups. It's not, you can't just like take like a recording of one and like play it to the other. So much of my job is translating, right? Translating requirements from business to like what the engineers should be working on, translating problems from the engineers up to the business people and why we should focus on it, right? Like you talk to product people and they're like, we want to keep shipping this new thing, ship this new thing, we want this new product, it's got to be out last week, right? And meanwhile, the engineers are saying, oh my God, if we ship this one more thing, this whole thing's going to fall apart, right? And it's really important for our engineering team to be able to have the confidence to speak up and like talk about like, what are the problems that we're facing today and turn it into a way a business person can understand the impact, right? So we call this, one of the things that jumps to mind is we call it technical debt. So if you've heard that, does anybody know the term technical debt? A few people. Who here has heard the term financial debt? It's very, very similar, right? So financial debt is good because it gives us power and leverage to build things quicker, right? If we didn't have financial debt, we wouldn't be able to buy houses, we wouldn't be able to start businesses probably, that kind of stuff, right? Same thing with technical debt. We need some of it in order to move fast to build what we need to, because if we try to build it without technical debt, then we're not going to get anywhere. But at the same time, if you build the wrong type of technical debt or too much of it, the house starts crumbling and falling apart, right? Same way if you have too much credit card debt or whatever. So that's the comparison. What's the word?
Analogy.
Analogy, that's it. On how to do that. So it's important to take like those technical debt problems and translate them into like, what does this mean for the business? What does this mean for like that product you want to launch in 6 months from now? If I don't fix this today, you're not going to be able to launch that in 6 months from now. So that's being able to speak both those like languages is so crucial, and I think that's actually why maybe I'm in the role I am today, because it feels like something natural.
Yeah, well, it's something that I've noticed with you in the times that we've connected, is that you actually have a lot of these analogies between business world and tech world that you use to explain to one another, which is why you actually have been really good at teaching our Tech 101 class. No, this wasn't another ploy to push it on people, but it does have a unique quality that I find a lot of tech teams are missing. So when you look at your role at Wealthsimple as a whole, does your CPA come out in other ways that you wouldn't have thought when you decided to leave insolvency years and years ago?
Yeah, I think that's the major one. Obviously, being able to understand business strategy and stuff. I think, we do a lot, like we're a very data-driven company. So we make a lot of decisions based on the data we have, and we have a lot, we have a lot of users now, so we have a lot of data, we have a lot of transactions, all that kind of stuff. So we can analyze and like figure out decisions to make, right? So I think, having that analysis mindset around, hey, I need to make this decision, therefore I need what kind of data to support that decision. You may, as a CPA, have to go ask somebody to get you that data, right? It's like, hey, I want to make a decision, I want to know how many people are in this bucket of whatever. Hey, developer, go get me that stuff, right? Well, whereas for me, I can kind of do the whole thing almost, which is really helpful, where I can, come up with what are we trying to solve? What do we need to prioritize? What data do we need? And then I go write the actual code to grab the data, which is super powerful. And you'll see that now across our organization. A lot of our operations people now know how to write raw SQL queries. SQL is the query language that allows us to pull data right out of our databases and inspect it. So we, as a company, we value that pretty highly.
Just to wrap us up here, I want to leave some time for everybody's questions. As you're sitting here looking at where Wealthsimple is now, is it, you went in 2 years from $500 million to $3 billion. Does that mean 2 years from now we're at 15 billion or something? What's the Wealthsimple plan as much as you can share with the rest of us who are always interested in hearing more.
Yeah, I mean, you can take the extrapolation and go from there. That's a good exercise for the homework, right? I think that we're happy with our growth rate, but like I said before, we want more, right? Like it's never enough, right? It's like your dad when you come home from school. It's like, look, Dad, I got 98% on this math test, and they ask you what happened to the other 2%, right? So same mentality. It's like what can we do better? So that's our growth rate today. We want to be more. We want to be better. We always have plans for international globalization, and I think
Great. Yeah. Well, it's now UK and the US, right?
Yeah, we operate in the US and the UK today. So.
Awesome. Well, I mean, to begin with, thank you so much for being here today. If we could get a little bit of a round of applause, it's been really wonderful. Now I'd like to turn it to the audience. We have maybe around 10 minutes to ask a couple questions of John. Let's hands.
All right.
There we go.
Hello.
Hi.
I was wondering if you could explain a little bit. So from my perspective, I'm not a huge gamer, but I've kind of gotten into more gaming from a hyper-casual perspective. And it seems like that's kind of a popular grouping of gaming now. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that as well, and what you think might be driving that, if that is something you're seeing as a growth engine for gaming.
In terms of hyper-casual, you mean like
app-style games and what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I think people need something to do with their phones. We have our phones with us. People are always glued to them. I feel like that's the go-to. In terms of what we do on a day-to-day basis, we haven't explored gamification or anything else in very big depth today. We do notice, though, that even though we tell people not to look at their portfolio every day, people look at their portfolio every day. Which is like the opposite behavior. So we've toyed around ways, like ideas on how we actually stop people from doing that, which is such a weird thing, right? Like you build these apps and there's always these the common stats for apps are like daily active users, monthly active users, like downloads, sessions, all that kind of stuff, right? And like that's the opposite of what we want, really. We want people to we want users. We don't want them checking on a daily basis. So we're kind of like at the opposite end of that spectrum. Yeah.
Got you next.
Thank you for sharing your story. So going back to the days when you were a developer, I'm sure there were many other opportunities elsewhere in the world, maybe towards the south. How have the opportunities evolved over time in Toronto, and how do you kind of see it now? I mean, you mentioned there's a shortage of developers, so what was it like back then? Why did you decide to stay here, and how's it evolved till now?
Yeah, it's a good question. We still face a problem with developers leaving for the south. We can't compete with the money they have down there, right? But it's also really expensive to live there. We also can't compete with the weather. The weather's a lot nicer down there. Ultimately, why I didn't go is probably you'll see in development there's a term called Impostor Syndrome. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's this idea of you always feel like you don't know enough and everybody else knows more than you. And this is summed up in a diagram I've seen online around it's basically a Venn diagram of a bunch of circles about the same size, and it's you know this much, this person knows this much, this person knows this much, and you're at the center. But what it feels like is everybody knows everything else and you only know this little piece. And so for me, I was still fairly, young in my development career then and didn't feel confident maybe exploring, moving south. Also, my family's here and all that kind of stuff. But we still face that problem today. It's important, I think, though, the Toronto community is getting better. We've got some big players now that help drive credibility and funding and all that kind of stuff to this market. So obviously Shopify and Instacart and these guys, right? That help keep the money here, which helps us pay a little bit better. It helps us compete a little bit more. But ultimately, we're not competing with. We can't compete on a money basis. It comes down to what we can offer as an opportunity to work. If that makes any sense.
You mentioned that in 2016 you guys won the Webby Awards and you like tore it all down and rewrote it. And that's something I would always advise not to do. So it's like a refactor or did you rewrite it completely? What was the deal there?
It was a completely new thing. So like new design, new everything. And I think that speaks to the fact that we're not afraid to, if it makes sense from a business point of view. So for us, you know, when you think of Wealthsimple, you think of the brand, I think, and you think of like the uniqueness of who we are. And so that's so important to our business, right? Like we can compete with the banks on like fees and that kind of stuff. But ultimately, the brand is what we truly believe in, and so if we think that's one of the most important like things in our business, and we put a lot of money to it, like obviously the advertising and everything, you know, ripping down a website and redoing it to match our vision of what the brand means to us is an easy business case at that point. Yeah.
I think we have time for just one more, and I saw somebody put up her hand before, so.
Thank you. My question is just in terms of Wealthsimple growing. Recently, there's been like reorg and the way they pretty much structure the business internally, at least. But how would you see that as being a people leader? Like, what do you think is important going forward for your team, and like how do you communicate upwards as well?
Yeah, I mean, communication is important, especially for the team, right? The funny thing is like I think we reorg every quarter right now. Like we're growing so fast that we have to always be rethinking how we structure our teams, how we divide responsibilities, and there's growing pains, of course, these happen. But ultimately, you know, my job is to make sure that my teams are happy and they feel empowered to do what they want to do, and they're working on stuff that they want to do, right? So we do offer opportunities at the end of the quarter for people to switch teams if they find that that's not working for them. But we also find that like because we're growing so much, like new positions are also opening. People want career development or stuff, we can push them into those roles. But you know, communication is also very difficult. Right? Sometimes we can communicate poorly and we learn our lessons. But I think that, you know, I think if you work at a startup, you also have to expect a little bit of like, I don't want to say bumpy road, but like maybe atypical like things that happen. Whether it's maybe poor communication one quarter, or maybe it's the coffee machine's broken for like 2 months upstairs because you know we haven't had time to get someone in to look at it, or whatever the case may be.
Sounds like a very specific grievance.
Yeah, well, it's been broken for a long time. You know, there's lots of things we deal with, and like you also like the same way you prioritize software development, you also have to prioritize these kinds of problems you run into. There's not something like you can't solve everything, right? You have to pick and choose what makes sense. So.
Awesome. Well, John, thank you so much. This has been great. We have a little gift for you. I think you already have a couple Luminary shirts, so here's a bottle of wine. But yeah, if everybody could just give John another quick round of applause. You've got a really unique perspective, and I still remember the day that I was talking to his CFO, Lean. She said, "Yeah, you know, one of our developers is a CPA." I went, "I got to meet that guy." So yeah, thanks so much for being here. Just before we wrap up, I do want to say we at Luminary we actually just hit a really awesome milestone. It has now been 2 years since we launched into market. So we're really excited about that. But most of all, honestly, a lot of whatever success we've had has really come out of all of you that come to our events and support us in other various ways. So we really have to thank you for that. It's been a really awesome ride, and hearing what John thinks about having people use the Wealthsimple app is very similar to how Adam and I feel about every time we have you guys showing up here, or people getting jobs that we see in the audience, or other things like that. So thank you, and if you'd like to beta test our new app, find somebody with a Luminary shirt because it's really, really cool. Those guys specifically would be good. Thanks again for coming, and we hope we'll see you at the next one, which is Russ Jones, the CFO of Shopify. So, yeah.